He walked through that front door with a tan he didn't get in Cincinnati and a confidence that should have worried him. 15 days away, a whole conference, he said. Very important. Lots of meetings, regional leadership summit, keynote speakers, breakout sessions on Q4 projections. He'd texted me updates the whole time, little breadcrumbs of normalcy, having dinner with the team. Exhausting day. Miss you. Back soon. He rolled his carry-on through the entryway, kissed my cheek, and smelled like someone else's soap. Not the Irish Spring he'd used for 12 years, something softer, more expensive.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I handed him a cup of coffee. He set down his bag and started in on the story. The keynote was actually pretty decent, he said. There was this one breakout session on managing remote sales teams that he thought could change how they structured their whole department. He talked while I stood at the counter and listened and smiled in the right places. Fletcher Aldridge was a good talker. Always had been. It was one of the things I'd loved about him. He could fill a room without trying. I waited until he paused to take his first sip. Then I said it. Calm, unhurried, like I was asking about the weather. Do you know what condition Helena's been dealing with? I figured she must have mentioned it, given the two of you spent 15 days together in Savannah. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. I watched his face go through 3 different things in about 2 seconds. First, confusion, genuine, reflexive, because he hadn't expected any of it. Then calculation. You could almost see him running through what I could possibly know and whether I was bluffing. And then fear, real fear, the kind that starts in the stomach. His carry-on slipped off his shoulder. It hit the hardwood floor and the zipper clanged against the baseboard. "What?" he said. The word came out thin, barely air. I just looked at him. "Helena," I said, "the condition. I assumed she must have told you, you two being so close and all. 15 days is a long time." He put the mug down. He put it down too carefully, the way you move things when your hands aren't entirely steady. There was no condition. Helena Price was, as far as I knew, perfectly healthy. I had invented that question from scratch, built it for one purpose, and it had done exactly what I needed it to do. But Fletcher didn't know that. Not yet. And that right there, was the whole point. Let me take you back. Because this story doesn't start in my kitchen. It starts 16 months before, in a Panera booth on a Tuesday afternoon, when my husband mentioned a woman named Helena, like she was nothing at all. I am not a dramatic person. I want to get that on the record early, because by the time I'm done telling you this, some of what I did might sound dramatic, but I need you to understand that drama has never been my style. I am a high school music teacher in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. I teach strings, violin, viola, cello. I drive a 7-year-old Subaru. I clip coupons, not because I have to, but because it genuinely satisfies something in me. I am the kind of woman who keeps a list on the refrigerator and crosses things off in order. I met Fletcher Aldridge when I was 28 years old at a fundraiser for the local arts center. He was there because his company had bought a table. I was there because the arts center ran a summer strings program for kids who couldn't afford lessons, and I'd helped them set it up. He found me by the silent auction table, looking at a weekend getaway to Hocking Hills that I absolutely could not afford to bid on. "You want it?" he said. I said I was just looking. He said, "You've been standing in front of it for 10 minutes. That's not looking. That's wanting." I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out. He wasn't flashy about it. That was the thing. He wasn't running a line. He seemed genuinely curious. He asked about the summer strings program. He asked how I'd gotten involved. He asked follow-up questions, which is the thing most people don't do. He actually listened to the answers. We talked for 2 hours. I missed the dessert course entirely. He drove me to my car and didn't try to kiss me, which at the time I found refreshing, and later I understood was just smart. He called the next day. We had dinner that Friday. 3 months later, he was meeting my mother. My mother, Rosemary, was not easy to impress. She'd been a school principal for 30 years and had that look, the one that could locate a lie in about 4 seconds. She liked Fletcher. She told me later he had good manners and steady eyes, which was her highest possible endorsement. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. Not a grand gesture, not a restaurant. He did it in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, while we were both trying to make omelets and failing. He turned around with the ring box already open and said, "I've been trying to find the right moment for 3 weeks, and I think the right moment is just now, whenever you're in the room. That's the right moment." I said yes before I looked at the ring. We got married at a small venue outside Columbus on a Saturday in October. 80 people, close friends in both our families. My mother cried. His father drank too much scotch and gave a toast that was embarrassing and also kind of beautiful. We honeymooned in a rented cabin in Vermont where it rained for 4 of the 7 days, and we didn't mind at all. That was 12 years ago. 12 years is a long time to build a life with someone. Long enough that the person becomes part of the architecture. Not romantic furniture, but load-bearing. You stop noticing them the way you stop noticing a wall, but you'd feel the absence of it immediately if it were gone. I felt the absence coming long before I admitted it was coming. That's the part I have to live with. We bought the house on Glenfield Road in our 4th year of marriage. 4 bedrooms, which was optimistic at the time. Ranch style, good bones, terrible carpet throughout. Fletcher and I spent 3 weekends ripping up the carpet ourselves and refinishing the hardwood underneath. We were terrible at it. There are still 2 spots near the hallway where the stain is uneven, and you can see where we ran out of patience. We got 2 cats from the shelter, Cleo and Biscuit. Cleo is orange and imperious and has never cared about anyone but Fletcher. Biscuit is gray and anxious and follows me from room to room like a bodyguard. We have had ongoing friendly disagreements about whose cat is whose. I maintain Biscuit chose me. Fletcher maintained Cleo's indifference was a form of deep respect. We had our rhythms. Sunday morning pancakes where Fletcher always burned the first one, and we'd developed a superstition that the first one burning was good luck. Saturday farmers market in the summer, annual camping trip in May. Nothing fancy. A state park 40 minutes from home. Same campsite every year. The one by the creek with the fire ring that actually worked. My mother moved into a condo 15 minutes from us after my father died. Fletcher drove her to doctor's appointments without being asked. He installed a grab bar in her bathroom shower when she started having knee trouble. He checked in on her when I was at school. These were not small things. Money was never overflowing, but it was managed. I taught school. Fletcher worked in regional sales for a medical supply company. His income varied with his commission structure, which meant some years were better than others. We had a savings account we took seriously and a vacation fund we took less seriously. We argued about money exactly the way you'd expect. Not bitterly, but with the low-grade tension of 2 people who each think the other is being slightly unreasonable. We talked about children for years. Maybe after we paid off more of the mortgage. Maybe after his territory expanded. Maybe after my mother was more settled. The maybes accumulated, and I don't know exactly when they stopped feeling like plans and started feeling like excuses. By the time I was 38, I had quietly stopped bringing it up. Fletcher never brought it up on his own. We didn't discuss stopping the discussion. We just stopped. That silence was one of the things I should have paid more attention to. But you don't, when you're inside a life. You're too close to it. The ordinary days look like ordinary days right up until the moment they look like something else entirely. Our tradition on anniversaries was cards, not store-bought. Fletcher wrote in them. Every year he'd sit down somewhere and actually write. Things he remembered from that year, things he appreciated, things he wanted for us going forward. I kept every one of them in a box on the closet shelf. On his birthday every October, I baked a lemon bundt cake from a recipe his grandmother had left him on a handwritten index card. The card was spotted with age and written in pencil. I'd learned to read her handwriting. These things are the ones that hurt the most to look back on. Not the big gestures, the small, consistent ones, the evidence of someone paying attention, or someone who used to pay attention and then stopped, and I missed when exactly the shift happened. Fletcher mentioned her for the first time on a Tuesday. We were at Panera, the one on Morse Road, which we went to more than we should have because it was close, and they had that butternut squash soup I liked in the fall. He was telling me about a restructure at work. His division was adding a regional account manager, someone brought in from outside to handle 3 territories that had been underperforming. She started today, he said, pulling apart his bread bowl. Helena, sharp from what I can tell, has a background in medical device sales, so she actually knows the product side, which is rare. I said something like, "Oh, good," and asked for the pepper. That was it. That was the whole moment. Helena Price's name came up again a few weeks later. A work dinner she'd organized. Then a month after that, a training she'd led that had apparently been one of the better ones Fletcher had sat through in years. Sometime around February, she showed up in passing conversation maybe once a week. By spring, it was more. He called her his work wife. He said it lightly as a joke, the way people do. "She gets me," he said once. Like work-wise. We just click. I said that was nice, which I meant. A good working relationship is something. I know that from my own years in a school building, how much easier everything is when you have someone who just gets it. I want to be clear. I was not naive. I was not an oblivious woman who missed obvious signs. The signs were not obvious. They were gradual. They were the kind of thing that, if you showed them to someone all at once, would look alarming. But spaced out over 16 months in the context of a 12-year marriage, they just looked like ordinary life adjusting and shifting the way it does. Helena came to the company holiday party in December. I met her. She was attractive, tall, with dark hair she wore in a low ponytail, and a direct way of looking at you when you talked. She shook my hand, said she'd heard so much about me, complimented my earrings. Fletcher stood beside her, and they had the comfortable shorthand of people who spent a lot of time together, finishing each other's jokes, the glance you exchange when someone says something you've both agreed on privately. I noticed it. I noted it somewhere internal and didn't examine it further. I'm still deciding whether that was wisdom or cowardice. I'm leaning toward the latter. By the following spring, the spring before all of this, Helena was mentioned enough that her name felt like furniture in our conversations. She was just there. I didn't feel threatened. I felt, if anything, vaguely grateful that Fletcher had found someone at work who energized him. He'd been plateauing a bit. The work had stopped interesting him. Helena, and whatever the two of them were building professionally, seemed to have given him something back. I was glad for him. God, I was glad for him. He told me about the conference in early April, Regional Sales Leadership Summit. The company hosted it every 18 months or so, rotating cities. Big thing, he said. Multiple divisions coming together. Good for his standing to be there and be visible. The company would cover flights, hotel, meals, the whole thing. 15 days. 15 days is a long time, I said. I know, I'm sorry. But this is the kind of thing that matters if I want to make director before 50. He was 44. I understood the math. I helped him pack. That's the part I think about now. I stood in our bedroom and helped him fold dress shirts and pack his good blazer and make sure he had enough of his allergy medication. I ironed 2 of the shirts because Fletcher irons badly. He presses in creases rather than out. I put his travel toiletry bag together. I am thorough and organized, and I packed for my husband to go spend 15 days with another woman, and I did not know that's what I was doing. 2 days before he left, he asked me to check his gray sport coat for dry cleaning tags. He'd picked it up but hadn't gotten to it. I went into the coat closet, pulled it out, felt through the pockets the way you do. There was a receipt in the inside pocket, small slip of paper, parking receipt, time-stamped, from a garage in Savannah, Georgia. I stood there and looked at it. Fletcher worked in Columbus. His company's regional territories were Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and western Pennsylvania. He traveled occasionally. Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, Louisville. Not Savannah. Not even close to Savannah. I brought it to him, held it out between two fingers like a question. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. And he smiled. "Oh, that's ancient," he said. "We did a customer visit down there. God, must be 8 or 9 months ago. Just a day trip. Didn't even stay the night." He said it without hesitation. Easy. Practiced or just easy? I still don't know. "Why's it still in your pocket?" I asked. He shrugged. "You know how it is with that coat. I don't wear it that often." He took it from my hand, dropped it in the trash, and went back to packing. I stood there. And then I said, "Okay," and went to finish his toiletry bag, but I did not forget about the receipt. I kept it, that image of it. The timestamp, the location, the casual way he'd dismissed it. I kept it the way you keep a splinter you can't quite get to. It wasn't making me bleed, but it was there. I drove him to the airport on a Friday morning. We hugged at the departure curb. He said he'd call when he landed. He did. He always did. I went home and fed the cats and made dinner for one and started my weekend. I told myself I was fine. I wasn't exactly lying. I just wasn't paying enough attention to know the difference. 3 days into the conference, I stayed up too late grading theory worksheets and found myself drifting through my phone the way you do when your brain is tired but your eyes won't close. I checked Instagram. I didn't post much, but I browsed. Mostly former students, some music community accounts, a few people from Fletcher's work that I'd connected with over the years. One of them, a woman named Pam, who was some kind of regional coordinator at Fletcher's company and who posted constantly, had put up a group photo from a happy hour that evening. 8 or 9 people, some faces I knew from the holiday party, drinks in hand, big smiles. The caption said something about the Columbus team letting loose on a Thursday. Columbus team. I looked at the photo carefully. Fletcher wasn't in it. That wasn't surprising. He was in Cincinnati after all. But Helena wasn't in it either. I sat with that for a moment. Then I told myself it meant nothing. Plenty of reasons someone might miss a happy hour. Maybe she was on a call. Maybe she left early. Then I remembered the parking receipt. Savannah, Georgia. I pulled up Helena's Instagram. I hadn't been to her profile before. I wasn't in the habit of tracking my husband's coworkers, but I found it without difficulty. She kept it relatively private, but her location tags on older posts were visible. I scrolled back 8 or 9 months. There it was, a story highlight, a shot of what looked like a hotel bar. Warm light, a cocktail in frame, the edge of a wood-paneled wall behind it. The location tag said, Savannah, Georgia. The date was the same weekend as the parking receipt. I put my phone face down on the coffee table. Cleo, who was curled on the armchair across the room, lifted her head and looked at me. I looked back at her. And then I got up, went to my home office, and started pulling credit card statements. I am organized by profession and temperament. 12 years of managing a school music program, scheduling rehearsals, coordinating concerts, tracking equipment budgets, handling parent communications, had made me very good at finding things and keeping track of them. I pulled up 3 months of our joint credit card statements on my laptop. I went through them line by line with a yellow legal pad next to me. It took about 40 minutes to find what I wasn't looking for. A hotel charge in Savannah, Georgia. A boutique property, I looked it up, that ran about $220 a night. The charge was for 2 nights. That aligned with the weekend of the parking receipt. There was a dinner charge the same weekend at a restaurant in Savannah's historic district, $160. Not a business dinner amount, a date dinner amount, a spa charge. $68, the kind of add-on that didn't fit on a one-day customer visit. 6 weeks after that, there was a restaurant charge in Columbus I didn't recognize, a place I'd never been to, in a neighborhood Fletcher didn't typically go to. Midweek, $84. I wrote everything down: date, merchant, amount, location. Then I printed the statements, all 3 months, and highlighted each charge I couldn't account for. Then I created a folder on my personal laptop, not the shared one we kept in the living room, my school laptop, which Fletcher never touched. I named the folder something boring, Budget Templates. I password protected it and used a password he wouldn't guess, my grandmother's maiden name and the year she was born. I put the printed statements in a manila folder in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet under a hanging file labeled Orchestra Inventory. I was not panicking. Panic is loud and it wastes time. What I felt was quieter than panic. Slower. More purposeful. I had 15 days while Fletcher was gone. I was going to use every one of them. I took a breath and I started making calls. By day 5 of Fletcher's absence, I'd put together a reasonable picture. Not complete, but convincing. And then someone tried to take it apart. I called a woman I'll call Renee. She and I had stayed loosely in touch after she left Fletcher's company 2 years earlier. She worked in HR compliance there for almost a decade. She wasn't a close friend, but she was the kind of person who knew things and didn't mind sharing them if you asked right. I asked her carefully whether she'd heard anything about Helena Price. Not allegations, just general chatter. The kind of thing that circulates in office buildings. Renee was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Actually, I heard they had a pretty bad falling out at that regional meeting in March. Supposedly it got ugly. Raised voices, the whole thing. I heard they weren't even on speaking terms after." I sat with that. It was exactly the kind of information that sounds clarifying and instead muddies everything. I spent 4 days with that version of events. I half convinced myself the Savannah trip had been innocent, a coincidence of proximity, nothing more, that the falling out had ended whatever might have started, that the credit card charges were explainable with enough imagination. I sat in my own house and almost talked myself out of what my eyes had already seen. What brought me back was Venmo. On day 9, I checked Fletcher's Venmo. We had each other's accounts linked. We'd done it years ago, splitting a vacation rental, and never changed it. He barely used it, so it never seemed like anything worth thinking about. There was one transaction from 3 weeks earlier, $42, to Helena Price. The note said, "Dinner, our spot, our spot." I stared at that for a long time. There is no innocent explanation for a married man sending $42 to a female coworker and labeling it our spot. I went back to my folder. I stopped doubting, and I started building again, this time without any room for second-guessing. On day 10, I was sitting at my kitchen table with the printed statement spread out in front of me, making notes, when there was a knock at the back door. My neighbor, Dottie Farnsworth. 71 years old, retired, 5 feet 2 inches of pure practicality. She was holding a casserole dish I'd lent her 3 weeks earlier. She had her reading glasses pushed up on her head the way she always did. She used them constantly but kept forgetting they were there. I opened the door. She took one look at my face. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing," I said. "Come in." She came in. She set the dish on the counter and looked at the papers on the table, and then looked at me again. "Sit down," she said, as if it were her kitchen. I sat down. She put the kettle on, and she'd been in my kitchen enough to know where things were, and then she sat across from me with her hands folded on the table and waited. I don't know why I told her. I wasn't planning to. I'd been very careful not to tell anyone, not to give the situation reality outside my own head. But Dottie had a way of sitting quietly that made silence feel wasteful. So I told her the outline, the parking receipt, the Instagram, the credit card charges, the Venmo transaction. She listened without making a sound. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you want to feel better right now, or do you want to win?" I looked at her. "Because those are 2 different strategies," she said, "and you can't really do both at once." I told her I wanted to win. She nodded, like that was the right answer. Got up, poured the tea, and sat back down. "Tell me what you have and what you don't have," she said. And so I did. Dottie Farnsworth spent 32 years as a bookkeeper for a personal injury law firm in Columbus. She had seen, by her own accounting, just about every way a person could behave badly and then try to hide it financially. She looked at my printed statements with the reading glasses finally on her nose, and she was quiet and methodical in a way that felt familiar, professional, almost. "These are good," she said, "but screenshots wouldn't hold up the way you'd want. You need the originals, printed directly from the bank portal, time-stamped, with account information at the top. And then you need a second copy, printed somewhere other than your house in case." I had not thought about in case. "There's a FedEx office on Henderson," she said. "Print them there and keep a copy at my house. Don't tell Fletcher you did it." She kept talking. She told me about how financial documentation worked in divorce proceedings. Not as legal advice, she was careful to say, but just as someone who'd watched lawyers use it for 3 decades. She told me what made evidence useful and what made it easy to dismiss. She told me to write down every conversation I'd had about any of this, time-stamped, in a separate notebook, and keep that at her house too. Then she mentioned, almost as an aside, that her nephew worked in IT at Fletcher's company. Had been there about 4 years. She wasn't going to ask him to do anything improper. She made that clear. But she knew that the company had an HR ethics line, an anonymous tip line for reporting workplace conduct violations. And she knew that relationships between team members and reporting structures were considered conflicts of interest under the employee handbook. "Helena is his account manager," I said. "I know," Dottie said. "So Fletcher is technically in her chain." She let that sit. I thought about it. I didn't do anything with it that day, but I filed it away. Dottie's motive, as far as I could tell, was simple. She'd watched her daughter go through a divorce 7 years earlier. Blindsided, unprepared, cleaned out in the settlement because she'd trusted instead of documented. Dottie wasn't going to let that happen to someone else if she had a way to prevent it. She stood up, rinsed her mug, and said, "You're smart. You just need to stay methodical. When they're scared, they make mistakes. Your job is to be ready when they do." She went home. I sat there for a while. And then I got in my car and drove to FedEx office and printed everything. The landline was my mother's idea originally. When she moved nearby a few years ago, she worried about reaching us if something happened and her cell wasn't working. We still had the number from when we'd first bought the house. It was bundled into something, I honestly couldn't tell you what, and we'd just never canceled it. It sat on a little base on the kitchen counter and almost never rang, except that it had rung. I could see the message light blinking, had been blinking for days actually, and I'd been ignoring it because it was almost always the pharmacy or a survey call. Day 11. I pressed play. First message, a woman's voice, unhurried, relaxed. "Hey, it's me, just checking in. Call me back when you get a chance, hope the drive wasn't awful." A pause. "Miss you already." The message ended. She didn't say her name. She didn't need to. I stood at the counter and listened to it twice. Then I let the second message play. Same voice. 3 days later. "Okay, so I found that restaurant I was telling you about. It's on a list of the best new places in the country, apparently. I'm making a reservation for when you're back." "Don't argue with me about it. You know I always pick right." She laughed, light and comfortable, the laugh of someone who knew exactly where they stood. "Also, your cats are probably judging you for being gone so long. Okay, talk soon." My cats. She talked to him about my cats. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. Then I picked up my cell phone and recorded both messages by playing them back with the phone held close. Not ideal, not the clean audio you'd want, but enough. I saved the recordings and texted them to myself with the date and time. Then I wrote out the content of both messages, word for word, in the notebook Dottie had told me to keep. I dated the entry. I noted the landline number the messages had been left on. I noted the date they were received, based on the timestamps on the machine. Then I pulled a USB drive out of my desk drawer and copied everything onto it. All of it. The photos, the recordings, the typed notes. I put the USB drive in the small ceramic dish on my desk where I kept paper clips and rubber bands. And I went to bed at 11:37 and stared at the ceiling for 2 hours. Day 12. Fletcher called in the afternoon. He always called in the afternoon. It was one of the things he'd kept consistent, almost admirably so. He said the conference was winding down, but he was going to extend the trip by 2 days to do some client meetings in the area while he was already down there. Client meetings in Cincinnati. I said, of course, that made sense. Take the time you need. After I hung up, something felt wrong. Not the call. Not any one thing about the call. Just a general wrongness. The way a room feels different when something's been moved and you can't pinpoint what. I went to my office. I looked at the small ceramic dish. The USB drive was gone. I stood there and looked at the dish. A handful of rubber bands, 3 paper clips, a dried-out pen I'd been meaning to throw away. No USB drive. I checked the desk surface, the drawers, the floor around the desk in case it had rolled. I went through the desk systematically. I checked the couch cushions in the next room, which made no sense, but I checked anyway. Gone. I went to my laptop. I navigated to the budget templates folder. It was empty. I sat down. I thought very carefully through the last 48 hours. Who had been in the house? The cleaning service had come on Tuesday, a team of 2 who'd been coming to us for 3 years, who had keys. I had no reason to suspect them, but I also had no other explanation. I thought about whether Fletcher could have accessed the laptop remotely. We had family sharing enabled for the Netflix account. It was theoretically possible to be on the same network, but he was in Cincinnati, or Savannah. Wherever he was. I didn't know. I still don't know, actually. What I knew was the USB drive was gone. The folder was empty. I had the printed statements in my filing cabinet, and I had the copies at Dottie's house, but the voicemail recordings, those were gone. The audio was gone. I called Dottie. Okay, she said when I told her. Just okay, flat, no drama. What do you still have? The printed statements, the notebook, whatever you have at your place. That's more than enough, she said. Start over on the rest. Clean, don't rush it. I hung up and sat with the loss for exactly 10 minutes. I gave myself 10 minutes of feeling it. The sick helplessness of having built something carefully and watching it disappear. Then I got out a fresh legal pad and started writing down everything I could remember from both voicemails, word for word. I was not starting from zero. I was starting from a different place than I'd been. That was different. I told myself that. I kept telling myself that until I believed it. Celsius. By day 13, I had rebuilt what I could and made peace with what I couldn't. The voicemail recordings were gone, but I had written down the content of both messages within hours of hearing them, word for word, in the notebook I kept at Dottie's. What I'd written was accurate. I'd paid attention when I listened, and I had a good memory for detail. An occupational requirement when you're managing 40-something teenagers in a rehearsal. I called the boutique hotel in Savannah. I had looked up the specific property when I found the credit card charge, so I had the name. I called and asked to speak with someone about a reservation. When I reached the front desk, I used a flat, slightly distracted voice, the voice of someone who was busy and mildly inconvenienced, and I said I was following up on a reservation that had been made by my husband a while back, a stay he'd shared with a colleague, and I needed to confirm the dates for a reimbursement form his company was requesting. The woman at the front desk paused. Then she said, "Can I get the name on the reservation?" "Aldridge," I said. "Fletcher Aldridge." A longer pause. I heard keys clicking. "I do see a reservation under that name," she said, careful now. "I can confirm dates were the 11th and 12th, checked out the morning of the 13th. "Perfect," I said. "That matches what I have. Thank you so much." I hung up. I wrote down exactly what she'd said, word for word, and I recorded the date and time of the call in my notebook. It wasn't a subpoenaed hotel record. It wasn't a signed affidavit. But it was a direct confirmation from the property, documented immediately after the call, and it would tell a story. I printed the new versions of the statements from the bank portal with the full account header and drove to FedEx office and had a second set made. I put one set in my filing cabinet. One set went to Dottie. Then I sat down and did something I had been turning over in my mind for several days. I thought about Helena's husband. His name was Harlan Price. I had found this out through Dottie's quiet inquiry. Nothing improper, just a name in a company directory her nephew had been able to look at legitimately. From there, I found him the ordinary way. He coached youth soccer. He had a modest social media presence, game scores, pictures with his daughters, the occasional post about a home project. He looked like a straightforward person living a straightforward life. I sat with the question of whether to contact him for 2 full days. Here is what I kept coming back to. If the situation were reversed, if it were me on the other side of this, the spouse who didn't know, I would want someone to tell me. I would not want to be the last person in the room to understand what my life actually was. I had been that person, and no one had told me. I was telling myself in real time, through credit card statements and parking receipts and a voicemail from a woman who talked about my cats like she knew them. I didn't know Harlan Price. He had not done anything to me. But he had a right to the same information I was working with. I wrote the email carefully. I wrote it and rewrote it 4 times over 2 evenings. I kept it factual. I did not editorialize. I did not tell him what to do with the information or how to feel about it. I laid out what I had found, the Savannah trip, the hotel confirmation, the credit card documentation, the Venmo transaction, the content of the voicemails, and I attached the relevant documents. I said, I thought you should know. I'm sorry to send this. I'm not sending it to cause harm. I'm sending it because I would have wanted someone to send it to me. I read it once more. Then I hit send. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet of my kitchen. Cleo walked through the room without looking at me. Biscuit came and put his head on my knee. I didn't feel good about having sent it. I didn't feel bad either. I felt something closer to relief, like I'd done the thing that needed doing and could stop carrying the weight of whether to do it. I had one more day before Fletcher came home. I spent it getting ready. He texted from the airport. Landing soon, can't wait to be home. I made dinner. Something ordinary, pasta, a salad. I set the table. I fed the cats. I was calm in the way you are when you've been preparing for something long enough that the preparation has become its own kind of peace. I heard his car in the driveway at 6:48. He came through the front door, rolling his carry-on, the gray one with the broken wheel on the left side that wobbled when he pulled it. He was tanned. More tan than Cincinnati in April could have produced. He kissed my cheek. He set his keys on the hook. He smelled like someone else's soap, something with cedar in it, not his. He started talking about the conference while he pulled off his jacket, the keynote, the breakout sessions, a colleague he'd reconnected with from the Indianapolis branch. He was good. He was smooth and practiced, and I had known this man for 14 years, and I had never heard him lie this fluently before, which meant either he'd gotten better or he'd had more practice than I'd known. I let him talk. I handed him a cup of coffee. I waited. There was a moment, just before he took his first sip, where he looked at me with an expression I recognized, an ease, a relief almost to be home and past the trip and back in ordinary life. The look of someone who thought the hard part was over. That was the moment I chose. "Do you know what condition Helena's been dealing with?" I said, conversational, unhurried. "I figured she must have mentioned it to you, the two of you spending 15 days together in Savannah." The coffee cup stopped. His face did the 3 things I described at the beginning of this story: confusion, calculation, fear, in that order. It took about 2 seconds. His carry-on slipped off his shoulder and hit the floor with a sound that echoed in the front hallway. "What?" he said, not a question. More like a breath that ran out of air. "Helena," I said evenly, "is she all right? It must have come up, given how much time you were together." He looked at me. His hand was at his throat. A tic I'd seen before when he was genuinely frightened at his father's health scare 5 years ago, the time our car nearly went off an icy road. The hand at the throat. "I don't know what you're—" "Savannah," I said. "Not Cincinnati. The boutique hotel on the historic district. The one that confirmed your reservation when I called. The 11th and 12th. Checkout on the 13th. Silence. "The credit card charges," I said. "The dinner, the spa, the Venmo transaction. Our spot, I believe, was how you labeled it." He sat down on the bench in the hallway, slowly, like his legs had stopped working. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I had spent 15 days building the thing I was now saying out loud. I could afford to be quiet. He denied it first. Of course he did. "I don't know what you think you've found, but you're reading it wrong," he said. "There were meetings in Savannah, extension of the conference. Helena and I were both there for work. That's it. That's all it was." I let him finish. Then I went to the kitchen counter and picked up the manila folder I had placed there that morning and set it in front of him. He looked at it. "That's 3 months of credit card statements," I said. "The highlighted charges are things I can account for from our shared spending. There's also the hotel confirmation. I called the property directly and the front desk confirmed the reservation under your name, the dates, the checkout. And I've written down, word for word, what your work wife said in 2 voicemails she left on our landline while you were supposed to be in Cincinnati." He opened the folder. He looked at the first page. He looked at the second. He didn't speak. Then he started to cry. I want to be honest about that moment. It was not satisfying the way I might have expected. It was not the scene where the villain is finally cornered and justice arrives. It was just a man in my hallway crying into his hands, and I felt nothing particular. I felt distant, the way you feel at the end of a long illness when you've already used up most of your feeling, and what's left is just the practical matter of getting through. He tried to explain, not the facts. He was too smart to argue with the folder, but the circumstances, how it happened, how it wasn't planned, how Helena and he had started talking in a different way after the regional meeting last year, how he hadn't meant for it to become... I held up one hand. "I don't need the story," I said. "I've already lived the story. I need you to listen to what happens next." He went quiet. I told him I needed him to leave for the night. I told him I had already contacted our attorney, the same one who'd handled my mother's estate, a woman named Diane who I'd called that afternoon, and that Diane would be reaching out to him in the morning with next steps. I had a list of local hotels on my phone, which I read to him. I told him he could take a couple of changes of clothes. He asked if we could talk more, if there was any chance. "Not tonight," I said. He stood up. He picked up his carry-on, the broken-wheeled one he'd just brought home from Savannah, and he carried it back out to his car. I stood at the kitchen counter until I heard him drive away. Then I sat down at the table and let myself breathe for the first time in 15 days. Biscuit came and sat on my feet. I told him he was a good cat. He already knew. Fletcher called me from a clinic parking lot at 10:37 the following morning. He was not calm. He had gone, apparently, first thing, walking into an urgent care clinic and requesting blood work based on a vague and panicked account of a possible exposure. The clinic had asked him clarifying questions he wasn't able to answer well. He'd waited 2 hours. They'd told him he needed to be more specific about what he was concerned about and to follow up with his primary care physician. His voice when he called me was a register I had not heard from him before. Humiliation, mostly, a cold fury underneath it. "There is no condition," I said. "Helena is fine as far as I know. I made it up." Silence. "I made it up," I said again clearly. "The point was for you to sit in a waiting room for 2 hours imagining consequences, to feel a fraction of what I felt for 15 days while you were in Savannah with her. More silence. Then, that is cruel? Yes, I said. It is. How does that feel? He said something I won't repeat. His voice was cold and tight and furious. I let him finish. Then I said, I know exactly what I am. The question is, what are you? I hung up. I sat for a moment at my kitchen table with the phone face down in front of me. Outside it was raining. A slow, gray Ohio spring rain that had been coming down since early morning. The cats were both on the windowsill watching the yard with the focused attention of creatures who found rain deeply interesting. I thought about the question. The illness, the waiting room, the 2 hours of fear I'd handed him, and whether I felt badly about it. I didn't. I want to be honest about that too. I understood that it was calculated. I understood that it wasn't kind, but kind was not the tool for this situation. The tool for this situation was clear-eyed, deliberate accountability, and that's what I had used. Fletcher had spent 16 months constructing an elaborate fiction. He had used my trust as infrastructure. He had stood in our kitchen and handed me back a parking receipt from Savannah and told me it was nothing, and smiled while he did it. 2 hours in a waiting room felt proportionate. I picked up my phone and called Diane. We had things to talk about. Diane was 60 years old and had been practicing family law in Columbus for 32 years. She had short silver hair and a way of sitting very still when you talked to her that made you feel she was absorbing every word. I had not previously needed a divorce attorney. I was glad to have found this one. We met in her office on a Thursday morning. I brought the folder, I brought the notebook, I brought copies of everything. The statements, the hotel confirmation, the Venmo documentation, the written account of the voicemails. She went through it methodically. When she was done, she set everything back in order and folded her hands on the desk. "This is solid," she said. "You've done good work here." She walked me through what the process would look like. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, she explained. Assets are divided fairly, with the court considering a range of factors. The length of the marriage, the contributions of each spouse, the circumstances of the dissolution. Misconduct was not typically a direct factor in asset division in Ohio, but it wasn't invisible either. And 12 years of marriage, a house, retirement accounts, and a documented affair with a colleague in his workplace chain. There were things to work with. She also mentioned carefully that she had heard from Harlan Price's attorney. Harlan had contacted a lawyer within 24 hours of receiving my email. His attorney and Diane had spoken briefly. The two situations were separate, but the documentation I'd shared with Harlan had become part of his attorney's file, which meant it existed in two places now, in the hands of two lawyers, and Fletcher knew it. Fletcher's leverage in negotiating the settlement was significantly reduced. The house was half mine. I had put 12 years of income toward the mortgage, and I had maintained the house, and my name was on the deed. I kept the house. Fletcher kept the debts from his end, the credit cards in his name, the car loan. He kept his retirement contributions. I kept mine. We split the joint savings down the middle. It was not a dramatic settlement. There were no fireworks. Fletcher was cooperative in a way that I understood was strategic. He knew what I had, and he knew that making things difficult would only cost him more. He signed what he needed to sign. His attorney communicated with Diane. It was orderly and awful in equal measure. 3 months after Fletcher walked in from Savannah, the marriage was legally over. I sat in Diane's office when it was finalized, and she shook my hand, and I drove home alone and unlocked my own front door and stood in the front hall for a moment. Then I fed the cats, poured a glass of wine, and called my mother. It was a Sunday in July. I burned the first pancake. I always burned the first one, it turned out. All those years I thought it was Fletcher's doing, his inattention, his tendency to wander mid-task. And it was just the pan. The cast iron takes a few minutes to even out. I hadn't known that because I'd always handed it off to him. I know now. My friend Dana Calloway came over at 10 with a bag of good coffee from the place on 5th that we both spent too much money at. She'd been one of the people I'd called in the worst of it, careful, steady, not prone to drama, the kind of friend who shows up with food and asks the practical questions when everyone else is still processing the shock. We sat at my kitchen table and she drank coffee, and I made the rest of the pancakes, and we talked. Harlan had sent me an email a few weeks after the settlement. Short, just a few lines. He said he and Helena were in counseling. She'd wanted to try, and he hadn't decided yet what that meant for them, but the girls deserved the effort. He thanked me for sending the email. He said he knew it wasn't easy and he appreciated that I had. He wished me well. I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back and said I was glad he knew, and I hoped things went as well as they could for his daughters. Fletcher had moved into a rental near Clintonville. I knew this because he'd given Diane a forwarding address. I hadn't been to it. I didn't plan to. He'd sent me 1 email in the month since the divorce, a short, blurry apology, the kind of thing that's more for the person writing it than the person receiving it. I read it once and did not respond. Helena and I had not spoken since the holiday party 18 months earlier. The school year had ended in May, and over the summer I had done something I'd been meaning to do for 3 years. I started a small after-school strings program at my school. Free for any student who wanted to learn, equipment provided through a grant I'd spent most of April applying for. We had 12 students signed up for September. We had 3 violin donations from parents, a cello in reasonable condition from the school district's storage room, and 1 very enthusiastic viola student who had never touched an instrument before, but had informed me she intended to be excellent at it. I believed her. The house felt different. I had rearranged things. Nothing dramatic. Moved a bookshelf, rehung some pictures I'd been wanting to move for years, bought curtains I liked instead of the neutral ones we'd picked together because they went with everything and offended no one. Small changes that made the space feel more like mine and less like a negotiation. Cleo, infuriatingly, still sat on Fletcher's side of the couch. She could not be reasoned with. I had accepted this. Biscuit continued to follow me from room to room like a small, anxious shadow, and I continued to find this comforting. My mother called every other morning. She had not said, "I told you so," which I had expected. Instead, she had said, on the night I called her after the finalization, "You handled it well, Iris. You handled it exactly right." And then she'd asked if I'd eaten dinner, because that was her way of saying she loved me. I had eaten dinner. I had been eating dinner every night, which I mentioned to Dana as a genuine accomplishment. "That's a low bar," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm very proud of it." We laughed, real laughter, unhurried, at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning. Dana asked if I'd thought about what came next. Not men, she wasn't that kind of friend, but generally. What I wanted, what I was building toward. I thought about it. The strings program, the grant application I already had in mind for its 2nd year, the weekend trip to Asheville I'd been looking up, something I'd always wanted to do and never quite managed to schedule, the stack of books on my nightstand that I was actually working my way through now instead of falling asleep after 2 pages. The first pancake burned, the cast iron evening out. The rest of them, golden. "I think I'm building toward just this," I said. "For now." Dana raised her coffee mug. I raised mine. Outside, it was warm and bright, and already shaping up to be the kind of Ohio summer day that made you forget about the winters. The kind of day that felt like starting. I had not healed. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't going to wrap this up with a bow and tell you I was fine, because I wasn't entirely fine, and I didn't know when I would be, and I'd stopped trying to schedule it. Some mornings were still hard. Some nights I'd walk past the closet shelf and think about the box of anniversary cards and feel the loss of it in a way that was almost physical. But I was still standing. I was feeding my cats and teaching my students and applying for grants and planning trips and burning the first pancake. I was in my house, and it was quiet in the good way. the way that meant I had chosen it rather than been left with it. That question I had asked Fletcher. Do you know what condition Helena's been dealing with? It had started as a chess move, a way to make him panic, a crack I could wedge open before he had a chance to compose himself. But I'd been thinking about it lately in a different way. It was the first moment in the whole long story that I had stopped waiting and started acting. Before that, I was gathering and watching and second-guessing. The question was the moment I became someone who did something, who refused to stand in her own kitchen and be managed. I don't know if that's the same as winning. Maybe winning isn't even the right word. Maybe the word is just surviving. And then, slowly, after surviving, living. I was somewhere in that transition. Not there yet, not as far away as I'd been. The pancakes were done. I stacked them on the 2 plates and brought them to the table. Syrup, butter, the works. Biscuit appeared from nowhere, as he always did when food was involved. "Shoo," I told him. He did not shoo. Dana laughed. I sat down in my kitchen on a Sunday morning in my life, and I ate breakfast. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.